So welcome along everybody to our session today on evidence of learning in the corporate sector with the focus in this instance in the biopharmaceutical industry. So I would like to firstly welcome our attendees and more importantly, welcome Steve, who's our panel member for today. So Steve is a director of CBE Pharmaceuticals, which does training, based out of Melbourne, and some of the team are in Brisbane, Steve, I believe. And you do training not just in Australia, New Zealand, but you deliver training globally. And I guess more importantly now that we're delivering training remotely. So Steve has an extensive experience in the industry, including in training and also in compliance. And Steve is going to give us a bit of his background today before we get into the panel discussion. So Steve, I'm going to hand over for a moment to you. Thank you so much for joining us and offering your insights to us today. And if you can give us the background of your own experience in the industry to get us started. So over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona, and welcome to everybody today. And it's really nice that people could tune in. My background is I've been in the pharmaceutical industry, I think, close to 50 years. So that's why I don't have any hair left. I was in manufacturing and quality for about 20 and then went into consulting in 1989. So I've been consulting in the pharma industry ever since that time. And so mainly I consult in the compliance training space. So compliance means getting and retaining a medicines license from government regulators like TGA and FDA and EMA and those groups. And also complementary to that, I do a lot of training as well. So I have seen in our industry massive changes in the last 30 years. I've seen us move from no electronics to full electronic systems, and I've seen the regulations change, and I've seen industry respond to that. And so it's been an interesting journey, and I've seen changes towards personalised medicine, which I think is a fascinating field. But so I've visited a lot of manufacturers on a regular basis, so I'm quite interested in that area. So that's my background. I'm a microbiologist by training and a biochemist, but also hold qualifications in quality management as well. So
you're the perfect person to be delivering this kind of training, Steve, then.
I've seen a bit, and I've seen good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. And we might chat about some of those techniques as we get into the webinar. But
yeah, that would be great. Actually, we can go into more depth in some of those areas. And Steve, you talked there about really a changing landscape in this industry, and you've seen it change many times over the years you've been in there. One of the things I heard recently was the announcement by the FDA that it is no longer going to be acceptable for the pharmaceutical or the medical device companies to simply assert, if you like, that their employees have been trained. They must now, I understand, provide evidence of training. Can you give us a little bit of background on that, your knowledge about it, and also perhaps if you think that the TGA, I should say, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and also the European arm and the rest of the world, do you think they'll follow this trend, and what your views on that are?
Great. That's a really good question. And I might step back in time a little bit and discuss in the early regulations, there was a statement which said something like an employee should not sign a GMP record or a legal record unless they've been trained in that operation. So what that meant was if you, let's say you have to operate an autoclave, but you haven't been trained and qualified to operate that autoclave, you shouldn't be signing off records because your signature means that you're competent to actually complete that task. That statement was, I thought, a very relevant statement, but was subsequently taken out of the regs, maybe because they thought it was a bit too prescriptive or hard to deal with. But the intent of that document or that statement was to ensure that only qualified and competent people execute tasks and have been trained in that execution. So all of that tenet was still present in the regulations and government mind, even though the wording was changed. So there was a period of time when in a lot of countries, the inspectors said, well, okay, show us the training record. And if you've got a training record, that is evidence that you've been trained. But everybody knew that was not the case, because having a record is very different to being competent.
Absolutely.
So over the last 5 years, the regulators have changed their view, probably the last 7 or 8 years, have changed their view. And now they're demanding that not only do you have a training record, but you also are required to be assessed. And so being assessed means could be at several levels, which I can go through a little later. It basically means you've got evidence of competency rather than evidence of actually sitting in a room and having a training record. They're very different things. So,
very different things.
And so now in the current European regulations, there's also an additional piece which says if something goes wrong and you do an investigation and then you conclude that it was poor training or poor SOP that caused the problem, and then you can fix it by retraining, the regulators now don't accept that as a prime reason. And this is, I think, the right thing, because the argument would be that if I trained you and you still made a mistake, the training must have been no good. Or the person was no good. And then simply retraining in the same way is not a solution to that problem. And so now in the current regulations in Europe and Australia, you cannot default to retrain the person. You have to actually investigate the root cause of why they made that error. This is the behavioural GMP piece about understanding what went wrong and why it went wrong, not just defaulting to retraining. Well, retraining is absolutely important, but it's not the root cause. So that
is the proof, isn't it, that the person has actually understood that? I mean, I think in training, we're all guilty of that, aren't we? In whatever industry, we turn up to a training session and we tick the box that we've attended and we've been there and we understood. But really, unless someone is actually assessing us and providing, we're providing some evidence that we have understood something, often I know some organisations have said that really there's so much resources spent on training and so on, and often no evidence that actually any training has taken place. What was that knowledge acquisition, which I think is, where you're getting to here, Stephen. And with the no retraining and that human error that's not acceptable anymore, and you all said about the standard operating procedures, they also needs to really go back and do a whole assessment of what actually went wrong when the training didn't work. But what about the data integrity and trustworthiness of records, Steve? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. This is another very interesting topic and has a history, which we don't really have time to go into, but essentially, data integrity, sorry about that, I'll turn it off. Essentially, data integrity means that a company creates a GMP record, but how authentic is that record? So in the last 5 years, we now have these rules called data integrity, but it means ALCOA. Now, the acronym ALCOA means is the data attributable to an individual? And that means, do you know that individual was the person who created that record, which goes to their signature and their date, the unique signature? Is it legible? Can you read it? Is it contemporaneous, which means was it done in real time? And is it original or is it derived? And is it accurate? So that's what the acronym stands for.
Right.
And the reason why this is authentication of records is critical, because government inspectors and regulators rely upon these records to make decisions about the compliance of companies. So if they don't believe that the record is genuine, then this undercuts all their confidence in the company's compliance program. So the last 5 years, this has become a major thrust of companies.
Yeah, and with good reason, I would have to say. And Steve, you talk there about compliance and competency and so on in the employees and these organisations. When you talk about, we talk about demonstrated competency, what does that really mean?
Okay, you're asking really good questions, Gráinne, so thank you. I look at competency at 3 levels, and I'll just explain the dimension of that problem. If you think of a company, be it a pharmaceutical company or any other, and let's say you've got 100 employees, okay, and you've got 200 SOPs. Now, the universe of those combinations is 20,000 events possibly. Obviously, not everybody gets employed in every SOP, but in theory, you've got around 20,000 potential things you have to manage. And so that is an enormous task. But inside that, you don't have to demonstrate competency on every document. There are some documents where it's good enough just to read and understand, and I call that level 1, where you're asking the trainee to say, yes, I've read the document, and yes, I understand it, and I'm willing to sign off to say, yep, I'm confident, and I've asked all the right questions, and that's the end of the session. Those documents are more general, one like reference documents. If I don't know how to do something, I can go to that document and find it.
Right. Yeah.
Level 2 is where the trainer or the manager of the area thinks that the document requires a bit more support. And this is where the assessment comes in, which says, okay, I know you read it, but do you understand it? And so I'm going to test your understanding of that document. And so you would typically set up quizzes or assessments. You might set up case studies or tasks where you're actually assessing whether the trainee has absorbed the relevant information out of the document. I call that level 2. And level 3 is for more critical actions where if the operator or the person made an error, then it might have a fatal outcome for the product or potentially a patient. And that, at that level, level 3, the employee has to physically demonstrate competency. In other words, if they have to operate a machine, they have to show their supervisor, I can do this safely. If they have to run an autoclave, yep, I can do that safely. If I have to execute a test method in a laboratory, I can do it 3 times and the result comes out the same each time. So when you think of a universe of 20,000, it's a lot more complicated inside that. So you have level 1, level 2, level 3. So my experience, probably maybe half the documents are level 1, a third of the documents are level 2, and the rest are level 3. The critical ones are level 3. So going back to the 20,000 issue, there's no way you can do this on paper. Companies try, then after they've tried on paper, they move to an Excel spreadsheet. They're good for a while, but eventually the Excel spreadsheet gets out of control. I think most of the industry has come to the conclusion you now have to use an electronic system to deal with this.